living what we profess. In our witness to unbelievers, we are to live consistent Christian lives. Here's Gene.
This principle actually grows out of Ezra's experience with King Artaxerxes. King Artaxerxes had actually granted Ezra everything that he'd requested to go back to Jerusalem with a contingency of Jews, about 5,000 Jews who responded to the opportunity to go back to Jerusalem, coming out of captivity. And Artaxerxes granted so many things that he had asked for, but there's one thing that he did not ask for. And there's a reason. He did not ask for protection. And one of the reasons that he didn't ask for protection, well, it's explained here as Ezra reflects on the experience, and you'll find this in Ezra chapter 8, verse 21 and following. I proclaimed a fast by the Ahava River. The Ahava River was close to where he was there in Babylon. The people had gathered. They were ready to move out, to go some 900 miles, if you can imagine, by foot, traveling probably with animals as well. And so Ezra had a concern. And it related to the fact that he had not asked for protection. And so he proclaimed a fast by the Ahava River. And here's the reason he actually proclaimed this fast. So that we might humble ourselves. He included himself there, as well as this whole group of people. That we might humble ourselves before our God and ask Him for a safe journey for us, our children, and all our possessions. Now, as you read on this passage, you find out why he's concerned. He says, I did this because I was ashamed to ask the king for infantry and cavalry to protect us from enemies during the journey, since we had told him. And here, of course, is the reason why he called this time of fasting and prayer. We had told him, that is the king, the hand of our God is gracious to all who seek him, but his great anger is against all who abandon him. And he goes on to say, so, here's the reason we fasted. We fasted, we pleaded with our God about this, and he granted our request. You see, he was concerned about his witness. He had proclaimed to the king that God is God. And even though he asked them for all of these other things, silver and gold and all of those things to go, and the king had given all that he had asked, and we've seen that in a previous paragraph and principle, yet he didn't ask for protection because he wanted to demonstrate to this king that God is God and God can take care of you. God answered the prayer. We see this in chapter 8, immediately verse 31. We set out from the Ahava River on the 12th day of the first month to go to Jerusalem. And here is this incredible testimony which he is sharing once he arrived. This is a reflection, but he's sharing this with all of those in Jerusalem after they made this trip. We were strengthened by our God, and he protected us from the power of the enemy and from ambush along the way. The fact of the matter is there were robbers all along the way. There were thieves. There was all kinds of dangers on that trek that they made. And here they are, men, women, fathers, mothers, children, all of these people. And so by faith, they stepped out and asked God to protect them so that the king would see that God is God. Now, this doesn't mean it would have been wrong for him to ask for protection. In fact, when we go to Nehemiah, who eventually came to Jerusalem as well from the Babylonian captivity, he asked for protection. He asked for help. That wasn't the issue. The issue here is that Ezra had proclaimed that God would take care of them, and he did not want to violate that. He wanted the king to know that God is God. And of course, God responded to that, and God protected him. That doesn't mean we should take chances. It doesn't mean we should do foolish things. It doesn't mean that we should step out by faith and do things that really don't make sense. That's not the issue. The issue is, in this particular case, this was the will of God, and he followed through on that, and God demonstrated who he was. He didn't want to be a stumbling block to the king, and that's a principle that has many applications. And we read about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Therefore, whether you eat or drink, Paul wrote, or whatever you do, and that includes a lot, right? Whatever we do in our life, do everything for God's glory. And if we're going to do it for God's glory, Paul goes on to say the things that we should do. He says, give no offense to the Jews or the Greeks or the church of God, just as I also try to please all people in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, so that they may be saved. Now, Paul is not suggesting compromise here. He's not suggesting that we make changes in our lifestyle or adapt to certain situations that are out of the will of God. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about deliberately doing things that would offend or be a stumbling block. And that relates back, I think, to Ezra and his concern. In that particular instance, he didn't want to be a stumbling block to the king. That was his concern. That was the context, the cultural context. But out of that, we have this general exhortation that I think is very, very important in all of our lives as Christians, which now leads us to a reflection and response question. What are some of the specific things we should do or not do to practice this principle, both corporately, as a body of Christians, and personally? This question has tremendous implications. Things that we should do, positively, things we should not do. It's interesting, you look at the Ten Commandments, you have things we should do, things we shouldn't do. And it relates to us individually, and it also relates to us as a body of believers. And in responding to this question, it seems to me that one of the most general things that we can say, which relates back to Ezra and what he said and what his concern was, though it was a specific issue, there's a general idea, and that is we are to walk our talk. Now, the fact of the matter is we can't do that perfectly. There's not one of us can be perfect in imitating Jesus Christ. We're going to be in process of imitating Jesus Christ until he takes us home, until we're face to face with him, until we are individually and corporately transformed into his wonderful image. That will take place when we're with Jesus. But in the meantime, Paul said, be an imitator of me as I'm an imitator of Jesus Christ. This is the goal, forgetting what is behind, pressing on in order to reach that goal and to become more and more like Christ until we're transformed into his image. And I believe that the greatest thing we can do is be consistent. And consistency is something that we can have the general direction of our life. We're all going to be inconsistent at some point in life because we're human beings. And even though we're Christians. But I think one of the most significant things in terms of consistency is to admit when we're wrong. Ask forgiveness. And I've had to do that. I've had to do that in a corporate sense. I remember in one instance in our church, and I was the senior pastor, senior elder in the church, and one of our elders dropped the ball in relationship to a situation which was understandable, but it really hurt somebody who was in deep, deep physical, spiritual need. And this elder was so humiliated that he had failed to do that and to follow up on that. And I said to him, I said, look, we're together in this. We're going to go knock on this individual's door together. Now, the background is that this man had had some incredible disappointments in a previous church situation. So much so that there was a violation of his own wife, she was violated by a pastor. And so he didn't have much use for pastors. And so here was another opportunity. His wife was dying of cancer. And we had failed to follow through on something with him, even though he was not regularly attending. We knocked on the door. I said, I'm here to ask forgiveness as a senior leader of this church. We dropped the ball, and we're sorry. And you could just see the resistance melt away. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We humbled ourselves. And God opened a door marvelously to this man's life. His wife died, but we were able to continue on ministering to him in his walk with the Lord Jesus. So the fact of the matter is, we need to be consistent. I think in terms of my own son, when he was in college, and I'm thankful. He was just a normal college guy, but he didn't kick over the traces. I'm sure he did things I didn't know. But he didn't rebel against us. And one day we were driving home from college, and I said to him, I said, son, why have you not just rebelled like a lot of other college students do? And he thought for a moment, and he said something that is very, very humbling. He said, well, the reason is that you and Mom walk your talk. And why that's so humbling is because we didn't do things perfectly. In fact, I remember in an incident where I had certainly not disciplined him properly. It was incorrect on my part, misperception, and I had to humble myself and say, son, forgive me. Forgive me. So that was very encouraging. Even though we're not perfect, we can, by God's grace, walk our talk consistently to a point. But when we fail, we should ask God to forgive us as well as those that we've hurt or those we have failed. So let's remember this principle that comes from Ezra and his experience. In our witness to unbelievers, we're to live consistent Christian lives. And that was Ezra's goal in relationship to that trip where they fasted and prayed by that river, asking God for protection. And his goal was to be a consistent witness to Artaxerxes.